Thank you very much indeed, Peter. Now, I've invited Anne and Donnell to come up too, because we've got 15 minutes for a lively discussion. So please do use the app or the microphones for some questions. Anyone going to leap up? Gentleman there. Here comes a microphone. Save you getting up.
Thank you, Rod. Scott Milne, I'm involved in local body politics or governance in East Auckland. First of all, thank you all for your presentations, stimulating and somewhat provocative. I just wanted to pick up on comments that you made, Sir Peter, in your presentation about global autocratic moves by central governments. And also, Dr. Anne, your comments on empowerment at local body level. And we have seen in New Zealand some autocratic legislation come through, and particularly in Auckland at the moment, we are living under the COVID Fast Track Act, which has overtaken citizens' abilities to respond to resource consents via the Environment Court, and a potential loss of rights, one could say. Can you comment then on how these two activities react with each other, the rise of autocratic governance and the potential changes in empowerment that you see, Sir Peter, as being important to our city going forward? Thank you.
Well, I think they're two sides of the same coin. I mean, we're talking here about what is the social contract between an individual or a whānau and the state. And we have an implied contract that the state does certain things to help us, and we comply by being good citizens in different ways. I think autocracy is a form of disempowerment, because in fact democracy is designed with all its total imperfections to try and make people feel they have some empowerment over the shape of the future of their country. On the other hand, excess bureaucracy is also disempowering, and so the issues that have existed over time with the RMA and everything else and multiple complexities of decision making are also disempowering. And they're also very confusing for individuals, where autocracy is very clear. Who's the boss makes the call. So and so there is, in a sense, it's how do you make people feel part, I hate to say this word, team. We've had the team of 5 million so much in the last 18 months. But actually that's what we're talking about in Auckland too. How do we get a team of 1.5 to 2 million people operating in Auckland, or a few 100,000 different parts of Auckland, to have a greater voice? So it's a delicate game to play, Scott, but it's one that has to be played, because otherwise you'll end up ultimately losing social cohesion. Social cohesion has two dimensions to it. It has trust between those governing and those being governed, and horizontal trust between people who have different worldviews but feel that they can live alongside each other because there's been a way of the process of those different worldviews being respected. And that's what New Zealand does better than anywhere else in the world. And Auckland does it very well. Auckland, for its remarkable diversity, actually does have a high level of social cohesion. We should see that as a tremendous asset and work out how we use that for advantage.
Peter, sorry, Anne, did you want to add to that?
I was just going to make a quick comment about the move towards autocratic rule in some places. I mean, crises, we know, would tend to make societies want strong leadership, and we've seen, that we've respected strong leadership in the beginning of the pandemic, but it could be a slippery slope, as we've seen, as we saw during the Trump administration, etc. So it is also a fact of crisis situations that has accelerated that move towards autocratic rule.
Peter, you're right to emphasise participatory democracy and the mechanisms for it, which are very much on the rise, democracy 2.0, some people might call it. But that's very much a response to the failure of the party political system. And therefore, are you arguing against yourself by, on one hand, suggesting channeling the national parties in through Auckland Council on one hand, but on the other hand, you're arguing for participatory democracy on the other?
Well, I think they serve different purposes, and I love arguing against myself. It's a great skill to argue against yourself. It's part of...
Well, as long as you're convincing.
It's part of the scientific process to ask questions of yourself and put opposite views ahead and think about it. But I don't think they are opposite, because you're looking at multiple different issues in governance. And so decisions have to be made. It comes back to Scott's point. Decisions actually do have to be made, and decisions are easier to make when you have less people in the room. So a committee of 1 does better than a committee of 20 by definition. And political parties effectively reduce the number of committees, number of positions in the room from 21 to, say, 3 or 4. That's its advantage. That's different to issues which have a high values component that cannot be dealt with through the political process of the normal way. And if you look at citizens' juries around the world, and I served on the OECD committee that looked at a lot of this, they tend to work on things which do not align with the normal axes around which political parties operate. So they're dealing with issues of high societal values content. The famous one is abortion in Ireland, or where to site a nuclear power station in France. They are issues which don't fit within the normative political process. And there are issues like that around Auckland that exist, I'm sure. So and they also, we're doing a bit of an experiment, we're trying to do an experiment in Auckland, in Koi too. Do people see a citizens' assembly pulled together on a particular issue as a way of showing others that diverse views have been taken into account? I think there's a lot to learn from Maori in this. I mean, the Maori process of achieving consensus is very different to the Pākehā way of achieving consensus. And in a sense, is there something to learn from that in the way we deal with issues that have a high values as opposed to an operational content? The citizens' juries really only work well for certain classes of action. They do not displace elected officials.
Thanks. Richard, a microphone right behind you.
Kia ora, I'm Richard, I'm one of the Auckland councillors. I guess I could have sat in, and not being rude to anyone here, because I think this is awesome, I love this kind of stuff, but I could have sat in the same kind of forum maybe 20 times in the last 6 or 7 years, aside from COVID. Is part of the issue that, from maybe one of your first points around no one's selling Auckland, no one's proud of Auckland, no one's talking about Auckland, but also that we sit in rooms of mostly Pākehā people talking about how bad everything is all the time, you know, and sort of a vacuum of leadership. I mean, I look at, and I'm sorry if Heart of the City are here, you know, we've got an issue with Heart of the City right now, complaining about how bad everything is while we're investing billions of dollars in the city. We've got everyone sort of saying how terrible Auckland is all the time, and then but we still have massive population growth, which means people still think it's all right. Like, that, you know, you talk about diversity and other things, but that's happening. Mana whenua are getting on with it. We've got, you know, you can go any part of this city, and we do have those precincts already. We're just not talking about them, celebrating them, including them. Like, I don't know what the answer is, but sort of all the problems suggested are already on their way. We just pretend that maybe that they're not happening.
I mean, I don't disagree with anything you said, but I think the issues are perceptional, and perception becomes reality for a lot of people. And perception matters in the way Auckland and the rest of New Zealand work. I think perception works in the way Aucklanders relate to you and other councillors and other people. I mean, this is a reality. But also, we are, in the work we're doing, we're trying not to look at what happens next week. I mean, for instance, I'm not going to address the question in our work where the port should be. I don't actually think that's a thing for me to look at. I don't care where the port is at one level, but the decision has to be made where it is. Because while that decision is not made, a whole lot of other things are held up. And I think that's the issue, that we need to get better at putting some pegs in the ground so we can move forward. I think that the issues, yes, when I look at what's going on in the Southern Initiative, it's fabulous. But 90% of Aucklanders don't know about it, or 99% of Aucklanders may not. And it's not being turned into something that brings the business community, other parts of the system, into seeing that part of Auckland as an opportunity. They tend to see it, and that's why our report, when it comes out, is going to focus not on the negative, it's going to focus on the assets of Auckland, and the assets that can be, and none of it's new. Obviously, there's lots of intelligent people who think about Auckland. The issue is how to be provocative and get above the churn of the immediate to think about the churn of the future. And that's actually the challenge to think about. I, for instance, don't think I'm hearing a lot about what a smart city would be, what Auckland should look like in 2045, for example.
I was just going to comment more on the deliberative democracy processes and how they might help with that. I mean, we do hear people complain they don't actually understand where their rates are going and why Peter always likes to bring up why there's so many orange cones around all the time, and you know, some of the problems that you guys are all trying to address are really complex, and we are trying to bring a process where all those views can come together and actually be understood, and in a visible way that other people, even who aren't in the process, will see that, just people like you and me are in this, discussing it, really understanding what the issues are, seeing all the different perspectives, and coming up with a potential answer. So, I mean, we're only in the very beginnings of that, but I do think that's one way forward to get past all of the just complaining, not understanding it, you know.
Thank you. Yes.
You talked to one of the enduring legacies of COVID will be mostly acutely felt by youth, and that sits on a foundation of a population that has been underserved in a way, and as measured by well-being and mental health. And you also talked about the necessity that we need to be talking, particularly in terms of COVID and response and recovery. So I wondered, I work in MOE and largely in South Auckland, and where intentionally there is deliberate actions to engage youth in part of a problem solution around the recovery. We know that they are agentic, they're actively aware of the life that they're living and the impact that COVID had and what kids talk to. We've always been living in COVID. They are desperate for platforms to participate and have access to these kinds of forums. In your work, where do you see the activation of youth leadership and agency, or just having access to participate in forums like this?
So that's actually part of the work that we're doing at KOI too. So we are actively involving the rangatahi in all of our research, and their voices are being heard, and it will be part of what comes out of this report. For instance, the one that we're focusing right now on the future of Auckland, a lot of the things that you were just talking about have been brought up about the future. How would we think about the future of infrastructure, the social fabric of society, when all this generation know they've grown up a life of COVID, basically. They're used to staying home. They're used to doing things online, to socializing online, to going to school online. And what might their needs be in the future if they have such a view, this is their reality, and their needs might be different than ours are. So that's why when we're looking at our consultation, and I know we're just one organization, or when we're having these consultations, we're not just focusing on the older people or, you know, only the Pākehā voices you were just talking about. We're trying to get it as diverse as possible. And I'm sorry, as you were mentioning earlier about the decisions about the future, I agree with you. I think it does need to be inclusive of people like the rangatahi, of a bit more representative of the Auckland population, having diverse set of voices because these different communities know what's best for them, and they need to be included in that conversation in one way or the other. And yeah, I agree with what you're saying.
I find it interesting because Donnell's leading this or organizing this group, and we have 3 rangatahi leaders in our group, and they want to meet without this guy in the room. So they want to have that conversation on their level and together. So
we actually have an agreement with our rangatahi group that they're engaged not just in our programs, but actually in our strategic thinking about what we will do. So the 3 co-chairs who we pay an honorarium to are actually engaged in all the working papers our board gets and everything else. Yes, they're invited to. It's all new because we're only young, but they actually set up their own groups.
Yeah, and we're letting them lead it because they know what's best for young people, and that's sort of the position that we're taking going forward.
they have their own questions to ask, not being led by us oldies.
Thank you. Simon, here comes the microphone. This is purely for recording purposes. I know you can project.
Thank you, Rod. My question is about process. I think it's beyond dispute that Auckland will have to substantially decarbonise its transport operations within really the next decade or two. And yet the council has, you could argue, fallen at the first hurdle with an attempt in Onehunga at the moment to block us 3 or 4 little side streets in order to encourage the locals to use the major roads and create safer spaces for people to walk and cycle and take their kids to school and so on. It has created a firestorm of fury. And it augurs terribly badly for the whole process of how we're going to make change. And I wonder whether you have a comment, any of the 3 of you have a comment on how we're going to progress this.
Well, I'll be honest, Simon, and say I was disappointed with the Climate Change Commission interim report. Not because of the technical content, although some of it I would have argued about some of the detail, but because they didn't highlight that this is, in my judgment, in an accessible way and in a well understood way to lay people, most people who are not climate change experts, the trade-offs that are needed, the urgency of making them, and the compromises that need to be made. And I think until New Zealanders understand that there are trade-offs that have to be made to avoid the existential catastrophe that's ahead of us, decision-making is hard for people in decision-making. They will immediately get a backlash. And we have not yet, in my judgment, achieved an understanding and therefore an acceptability of the trade-offs that need to be made now, not just in 20 years' time, in terms of to deal with this existential crisis ahead of us. And so I think that at the end of the day, now, I mean, you're closer to the ground than I am, Simon, in this respect, but I think that at the end of the day, and this is an issue which we work with in the International Science Council, at the end of the day, the question is one, how do you change behaviours and attitudes? And you need societal change for the political process to be able to operate.
My own take on it is that the best lesson we can learn from the country's response to COVID is the importance of marketing.
Correct.
Yeah,
we're saying the same
so
thing.
yes, the Climate Change Commission could have done a better job, and yes, the local board members maybe could have done a better job, but fundamentally, nobody has engaged in this question of transport and in that local area, sophisticated, high quality, good marketing. Nobody's thought that was important enough to do.
Well, I think it's
I would
actually
agree.
more complex than that. I actually think we've become attuned over the last 30 years to silver bullet approaches as a simple solution to anything. And what we are facing now in this constellation of transformations we face, technological change, climate change, demographic change, sociological change, economic change, is the fact that there are no silver bullets. We're actually looking at complex systems that have to be changed. And to understand complex systems, you have to explain those complex systems to people in ways they can understand, and explain the trade-offs, and that there's no free lunch, that there are costs to any decision that are made because it has systems effects. Now, that's part of what we were set up to do, but it's taking us a while to find our mojo there, partly because of COVID. But I think at the end of the day, marketing without buying the population into understanding that there is no free lunch, that there are decisions that will have to be made that have consequences, both good and ones they may not like, is really important. And we don't do that kind of discussion very well in New Zealand. I mean, compared to many countries, we don't. The Fourth Estate is not in a strong position in New Zealand to manage, and with respect to you and to Rod, but in general, the Fourth Estate is not giving a lot of depth to these discussions in a way that's accessible to everybody.
Yes, Patrick, thank you.
I'm torn. There's a lot of things I'd like to raise.
Just blurt out.
Well,
what's front of mind.
Can I just say two? Just two. One of which, all three of you, I think our culture, as public intellectuals, I think this is a thing our culture does not push forward. We do not elevate poets to being ambassadors, as Allende Chile did, for example. So the Fourth Estate may be lacking, but are there structural barriers in our universities to academics joining, especially contentious political conversations? I just want to leave that question sitting there, because I think there are, and I think they have commercial sides, and I think Auckland University, my alma mater, has actually been a very poor player in Auckland's development. I'll just park that one. The second one, really for Donnell, is the question of agglomeration. Agglomeration is really a simple idea, isn't it? It's essentially concentration, the value of concentration and proximity. Auckland and all of New Zealand, and now especially since the quakes, Christchurch, are physically blousy, flabby, dispersed places, just physically anti-agglomerative. Yet we continue to subsidise, and I mean subsidise, the Southern Growth Initiative, Transport for Growth here. Public money goes into spreading out over these great rural areas that won't be rural much longer. They'll be McMansioned. So isn't this really quite a simple function of urban form that is one of our key problems? It just seems very clear. You mentioned Copenhagen. We can do a simple math. Denmark's similar population to Auckland. GDP per capita is 50% higher. Car ownership is half. And please don't say autonomous vehicles. All of the evidence is that these are dispersive, not constitutive. They do not concentrate.
I'll also point out Auckland, New Zealand and Denmark had exactly the same GDP in 1980, and it's worth thinking about what is the distinction between Denmark and New Zealand since then.
Yeah. Quite a lot.
R&D. Huge deficit in New Zealand compared to Denmark. And they have large multinationals based there, which we do not have. And I think one underestimates the importance of those large multinationals in the Danish economy. Maersk, Novo, etc.
Vestas.
Etc. Lego. Really important, at least to my grandchildren. I think we've got to... one of the things is, and it comes back to the comment that was made from somewhere over there before, you've got to look forward, not backwards. You need to understand how we got to where we are. But the issue is we're stuck with Auckland in its shape as it is now, horizontal, going to continue to grow, which I think everybody agrees it's going to be more vertical in its growth. But where that verticality is and how that's clustered together doesn't mean it all has to be in the CBD. And so I think that...
You say that like it's a bad thing.
Huh?
I'm not sure you understand urban form.
Well, I may not understand urban form. I don't understand a lot of things. But the point, and that's not my job, my point is we need to think more about the city's future as a whole and what it is to live in the city and what that means in multiple dimensions, be it in terms of education, health, economics, and so forth. Yes, there will be domains which experts will have different views on. That's healthy. That's the whole point. Our job, which we were briefed on by Auckland Unlimited to do, was to be provocative to start the questioning, not to make the answers. And so I would love a debate about urban form. That's not a debate that should not be had. Of course it's a debate that needs to be had. But it doesn't need us to answer it. We're not the ones fit to answer it. But we may be the right ones to say it's a debate, a discussion that needs to be held.
Well, we do need all the evidence and all the voices on the table, so bring it on.
Donnell, a last thought from you.
I think he covered.
Right, sure, thank you. Sadly, I'm going to stop at that point because we're well over time. I just want to thank very much Peter and Anne and Donnell for their work. So a big hand for them for their work and their presentation. Gave us a great deal of food for thought tonight about the complexity of COVID as an endemic proposition and how we might reset with purpose, but understanding about how we might understand Auckland better in terms of cohesion, engagement and empowerment. I just had done before this evening a tiny bit of agglomeration maths. Auckland has 30% of the population of the country and 38% of GDP. So in other words, Auckland contributes more than double to GDP than, say, the primary sector does. This is, but we still have lots to do. We were somewhat behind Copenhagen, for example, on that similar metric. I won't make any other attempt to draw a few thoughts out. I will just end, though, if I may, self-indulgently on a personal note, which is Auckland is the 7th city I've called home in my life so far. Auckland is the smallest city I've called home so far. Auckland is in many ways the best city I've called home so far, and I've lived in Auckland far longer than I've lived anywhere else, which is why I'm more excited about the future of Auckland than I am about any other place I know. So thank you, and stay tuned because there's an awful lot more in this process still to happen, and encourage everyone in the city to express their hopes and their fears for the city so we can find a way to progress. The bar is open, which you might need, for conviviality terms rather than sucker. So please do enjoy the chance to continue the conversation there. And lastly, a very big thank you to Ashley McIntyre. Big hand for Ashley, who sits there very quietly but works very hard to make these things happen, and to the AV team as well. So thank you. Go well and enjoy the city.